While millions watched her battles on tennis courts around the world, the most important fight of Serena Williams' life was happening in places no camera ever filmed. In villages across Africa, armed with nothing but pencils, books, and an unshakable belief that education could change everything. Welcome to the story Gook. Before we dive into this story of hidden heroism, secret missions, and the legacy that mattered more than any trophy, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that true champions change lives when no one is watching, hit that subscribe button and help us share stories of heroes whose greatest victories happen in silence. This is the story of how Serena Williams built an empire no one knew about, not of tennis courts, but of classrooms, not of trophies, but of dreams. It started with a single photograph in 2006. Serena Williams, at the height of her tennis career, was scrolling through her phone when she stopped at an image that would redirect the course of her life. A young girl in Kenya, no more than 8 years old, sitting on the ground outside a makeshift school building. No proper classroom, no books, no supplies. Just a desire to learn that reminded Serena of something she had almost forgotten. Her own hunger for education as a child in Compton, when resources were scarce and opportunity seemed impossible. Her father, Richard Williams, had always emphasized that tennis was just a vehicle. The real prize was education, knowledge, the power to change not just your own life, but the lives of others. That photograph haunted her. Here she was, earning millions of dollars for hitting a ball with a racket, while children half a world away were struggling to find basic school supplies. The inequality felt overwhelming. But instead of turning away, Serena made a decision that would quietly define the next 2 decades of her life. She began to research, not tennis strategies or training regimens, but education statistics in developing countries. What she found was staggering. In sub-Saharan Africa, over 60 million children were out of school. Girls were particularly affected. Cultural barriers, economic constraints, and lack of infrastructure kept them from accessing even basic education. But Serena also found something else: hope. Organizations working tirelessly to build schools, train teachers, provide supplies. Communities where a single classroom could transform not just individual lives, but entire villages. That's when she made a vow that she would keep secret for years. Every major tournament she won, every significant prize money she earned, a portion would go toward education. Not for publicity, not for tax benefits, not for recognition, simply because it was right. The girl in that photograph had no idea that her image had just inspired one of the greatest athletes in the world to become one of education's most powerful advocates. While the tennis world watched Serena dominate courts from Wimbledon to the US Open between 2006 and 2010, a parallel operation was taking place that would dwarf any athletic achievement. Working with local organizations and education nonprofits, Serena began funding the construction of schools across Kenya and Uganda. Not huge, headline-grabbing donations announced at press conferences, quiet, sustained funding that built classrooms one brick at a time. Her first school was completed in 2008 in a rural village outside Nairobi. 43 children attended the opening day. Serena wasn't there. She was competing at the Australian Open, but she received photos of the children in their new classroom, sitting at desks she had funded, holding books she had provided, learning from teachers whose salaries she was paying. The impact was immediate and profound. Test scores in the village improved dramatically. Attendance rates soared. But most importantly, something intangible changed. The children began to believe in futures they had never imagined possible. Serena established a simple but effective system. Working with trusted partners on the ground, she would identify communities with the greatest need and the strongest commitment to education. Then she would fund not just the construction of schools, but their long-term sustainability, teacher training, supplies, maintenance, even small libraries filled with books. Her approach was holistic and intelligent. She understood that building a school was meaningless without ensuring it could function effectively for years to come. So she invested in community ownership, parent engagement, and local leadership development. By 2010, she had quietly funded the construction of 7 schools across East Africa. Over 400 children were receiving education because of her secret mission, and yet virtually no one knew about it. The tennis press was focused on her rivalries with other players, her fashion choices, her occasionally controversial behavior on court. They had no idea that the same woman they were analyzing for her forehand technique was analyzing education policies and community development strategies. As Serena's tennis career reached new heights, winning Grand Slams, breaking records, cementing her legacy as the greatest of all time, her education work was expanding exponentially. By 2015, her secret network of schools had grown to over 20 institutions across Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana. More than 2,000 children were receiving education directly funded by her tennis earnings. But the impact was multiplying far beyond those numbers. Villages with new schools began attracting other investments. Government attention increased when communities demonstrated their commitment to education. Other philanthropists, inspired by the success they saw, began contributing to expansion efforts. Serena had discovered something that many development experts spend careers learning. Sustainable change happens not through massive public interventions, but through consistent, community-driven investments that build over time. Her schools weren't just places to learn reading and math. They became community centers, adult literacy programs, health education sites. Some villages reported decreased rates of child marriage as families prioritized keeping girls in school. Economic activity increased as educated young people created new opportunities. But perhaps most importantly, the children were dreaming differently. Students were talking about becoming doctors, teachers, engineers, careers that seemed impossible when their education consisted of sitting under trees with no supplies were suddenly within reach. Serena received regular reports from her education partners, photos of graduation ceremonies, updates on former students who had gone on to secondary school, stories of young people starting their own community improvement projects. Each update reinforced her belief that this work, invisible to the tennis world but transformative for thousands of families, was more important than any trophy she could win. The irony wasn't lost on her. The most important work of her life was happening in complete anonymity, while her least important work, hitting a ball with a racket, was broadcast to millions of people around the world. Building schools in remote areas of developing countries isn't as simple as writing a check. Serena quickly learned that her secret humanitarian mission would require the same dedication, strategy, and mental toughness that had made her a tennis champion. There were construction delays caused by weather, supply chain issues, and bureaucratic complications. Some communities struggled with internal conflicts about how the schools should be managed. A few projects faced corruption issues that required Serena's team to implement new oversight mechanisms. But perhaps the biggest challenge was cultural. In some areas, sending children, particularly girls, to school was seen as less important than having them work in family businesses or help with household responsibilities. Serena's approach to these challenges revealed the same problem-solving mindset that had made her dominant on tennis courts. She invested heavily in community engagement, working with local leaders to address concerns and build consensus around the value of education. She funded programs that provided meals at schools, ensuring that families wouldn't lose the economic contribution of children while they were learning. She supported initiatives that taught practical skills alongside traditional subjects, demonstrating immediate value to skeptical parents. When corruption threatened one of her projects, she didn't abandon the community. Instead, she worked with local leaders to establish new transparency measures and rebuilt trust through consistent, accountable funding. The most heartbreaking challenge came in 2014, when one of her schools in northern Uganda was threatened by regional conflict. Families began fleeing the area, and Serena's partners warned her that the investment might be lost. Her response revealed the depth of her commitment. Working with international organizations, she helped relocate the school's supplies and teaching materials to a safer location. When peace returned to the original village, she funded the reconstruction of the school and welcomed back families who had returned. "Education is hope," she told her partners during that crisis. "If we don't fight for it when things get difficult, we're telling these children that their futures don't matter." By 2017, when she was preparing for Olympia's birth, Serena had weathered dozens of similar challenges. Each problem solved, each obstacle overcome, each community successfully supported, reinforced her belief that this hidden work was her true calling. In 2018, a year after Olympia's birth, something unexpected happened that began to pull back the curtain on Serena's secret educational empire. A young woman named Amara Kimani, a graduate of one of Serena's first schools in Kenya, was accepted to university on a full scholarship. In her acceptance speech, she mentioned that her education had been made possible by a kind American lady who built schools, but never asked for recognition. A local journalist picked up the story and began investigating. When he discovered that Serena Williams had been quietly funding education across East Africa for over a decade, the revelation sparked international attention. Suddenly, the scope of Serena's hidden humanitarian work was revealed. By 2018, she had funded the construction or expansion of 43 schools across 3 countries. Over 5,000 children had received direct educational support from her initiatives. Hundreds more had benefited from adult literacy programs, health education, and community development projects connected to her schools. The numbers were staggering, but the individual stories were even more powerful. Amara Kimani was one of dozens of students who had gone on to higher education. Others had become teachers, returning to their communities to expand educational opportunities. Some had started businesses, created jobs, and invested in further community development. When international media reached out to Serena for comment, her response was characteristically focused on impact rather than recognition. "These children and communities did all the hard work," she said. "I just provided some tools. The real heroes are the students who studied hard, the teachers who dedicated their lives to education, and the families who supported learning even when it was difficult." But privately, Serena was processing the reality that her secret mission was secret no longer. The question became, how could she use this new attention to expand the impact rather than simply generate more publicity for herself? The revelation of Serena's educational work created opportunities she had never anticipated. Other athletes began reaching out, asking how they could contribute to similar projects. Corporations offered partnerships, foundations proposed collaborations. But Serena's approach remained consistent with the principles that had guided her secret work for over a decade: impact over publicity, sustainability over headlines, community ownership over donor recognition. She established the Serena Williams Foundation with a mission statement that reflected her long-term vision: to promote educational excellence and community development through sustainable, locally driven initiatives that create lasting change. The foundation formalized many of the practices Serena had developed through years of quiet work: rigorous community engagement, multi-year funding commitments, emphasis on training local leadership, integration with existing educational systems rather than creation of parallel structures. By 2020, as Serena was contemplating the end of her tennis career, her educational impact had grown exponentially. The foundation was supporting over 60 schools across 4 countries. More than 8,000 children were receiving direct educational support. Adult literacy programs had reached thousands more community members. But the multiplier effect was even more significant. Communities with strong educational foundations were attracting other investments. Government funding for education in supported areas had increased as local officials saw the results of community commitment. Other philanthropists and organizations were replicating Serena's model in new regions. Perhaps most remarkably, many of Serena's earliest students were now adults, contributing to their own community's development. Teachers, nurses, business owners, community leaders, all products of schools that existed because a tennis player had decided that education mattered more than personal recognition. When Serena played her final professional tennis match at the US Open in 2022, the tennis world mourned the end of an era. But in villages across Africa, the work that would define her true legacy was just beginning its second generation. Today, when young girls in rural Kenya dream of becoming doctors or engineers, when boys in Uganda see education as a path to transformation, when entire communities prioritize learning because they've seen its power to create opportunity, they're living in the world that Serena Williams built. Not the world of tennis courts and Grand Slam trophies, though those achievements were remarkable. The world of classrooms and possibilities, of books and dreams, of communities that believe education can change everything. The most important battles of Serena Williams' life were never televised. They were fought with pencils instead of rackets, with books instead of serves, with hope instead of scoreboards. She won them all. Every child who learned to read in a school she funded, every young person who pursued higher education because of opportunities she created, every community that transformed itself through the power of learning, they are her greatest victories. The world watched her serve aces and win championships for 2 decades. What they didn't see was the championship that mattered most, the one fought in villages where no cameras filmed, where victories were measured not in trophies, but in transformed lives. When the final accounting of Serena Williams' life is written, history will remember her grand slams and records. But in the places that mattered most to her, they'll remember something far more important. She gave thousands of children the power to write their own stories. That's the legacy of a true champion. Not the matches you win when the world is watching, but the lives you change when no one is looking. So now I ask you, what battle are you fighting that no one sees? What quiet work are you doing that might change someone else's world? Share your hidden mission in the comments and let us know what city you're watching from. Thank you for watching The Story Gook. If this story of hidden heroism, secret missions, and the power of education inspired you, subscribe for more stories of champions who changed the world when no one is watching. We'll see you in the next story, and until then remember, your greatest victory might be the one no camera ever records.